"We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary," Graham Vickers said during my termination meeting, with a smirk that made the room feel smaller. He told me it was nothing personal, just cost-cutting. My name is Victor Hale. I was 55 years old at the time, and I had been a lead systems engineer at Veltria Housing for 18 years. 18 years is long enough to watch a company grow from a small local operation into something big, and long enough to see the people at the top forget who built the foundation. I did not just maintain their infrastructure. I designed it. I built it. I expanded it. I repaired it at 2 a.m. when alarms went off. I kept it so stable that executives stopped thinking about it, which is always dangerous. When a system works quietly, leadership starts believing it takes no real skill to keep it working. I sat across the table from Graham, the new chief technology officer. He had only been at the company for 6 months. He was 42, wore expensive suits, and had the kind of confidence that comes from business school success, not from years of being responsible for systems that cannot fail. He had an MBA from Cornell, and he spoke in clean phrases about modernization and efficiency. In practice, that meant removing the people who understood the mess underneath and replacing them with people who did not yet know what to fear. Diane from Human Resources sat beside him. She slid a folder toward me like she was offering a menu, not ending my career at a place I helped build. She said the severance package was generous. 2 months of salary plus my accrued vacation time. Her voice was polite and careful, the kind of voice people use when they want to sound kind without actually being involved. I nodded and picked up the folder. I told them thank you and asked if that was all they had to say. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not beg. I did not threaten. Graham looked almost disappointed by my calm. I could tell he wanted a scene. People like him love stories where they're the hero who stands firm while an older employee becomes difficult. A calm exit gives them nothing to perform. Graham said most people in my position had questions and concerns. I shrugged. I told him it seemed straightforward. He exchanged a quick glance with Diane. She looked confused too. What they did not understand was that my calm was not peace. It was a wall. I was not calm because I did not care. I was calm because I had reached the point where anger felt like wasted energy. I was finished giving them my emotions. Then Graham leaned forward and added one more thing. He said they would appreciate my help with the transition. The new engineering team would need guidance on the system architecture. He suggested a consulting arrangement for a few weeks. The way he said it made it sound like a favor to me, like he was offering me a chance to stay useful. I told him I would think about it. Even while I said it, I already knew my answer would be no. We shook hands. I packed up my desk without complaint. 18 years of work fit into one cardboard box. That part hurt more than the meeting. I had always pictured leaving that place with a goodbye lunch, a speech, a handshake line, something that admitted I mattered. Instead, I carried a box past coworkers who avoided eye contact because they were afraid the same thing would happen to them next. In the parking garage, I walked toward my truck. My phone buzzed. A text from Alan, the database administrator I had hired 12 years earlier. He said the whole team was panicking. He said everyone was afraid. I did not answer. When I got home, I sat on my deck overlooking Lake Ontario. I poured bourbon into a glass and watched the sunset paint the water copper in gold. The sky looked calm, like it did not care about corporate decisions or severance folders. My wife Elaine came out and placed a hand on my shoulder. She asked what I would do now. I shrugged and told her something would turn up. She did not push, but I could feel her watching me. Elaine knew me well enough to know that my shrug did not mean I had no feelings. It meant I was trying to keep my feelings from swallowing me. What Graham did not know, what he did not bother to learn, was that I had not just managed Veltria's systems. I had built large parts of them myself in custom code. The company refused for years to fund a proper documentation team. Every time I asked, they said it was too expensive. They always promised next quarter. Next quarter never arrived. So I did what many engineers do when leadership refuses support. I documented what I could, but not enough. I kept parts in my head because there was always a new deadline and always a new emergency. Only I understood the deep redundancies and the hidden security layers. Only I understood why certain shortcuts were dangerous. Only I understood the strange little connections between systems that had been built piece by piece over nearly 2 decades. And I was not planning to explain everything to anyone after the way they ended it. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand how Veltria began. When I joined the company, it was not even called Veltria Housing. It was Bayview Properties, a small real estate management firm with 4 apartment complexes and a handful of employees. Their technology was almost nothing. 2 desktop computers, a fax machine, an old dial-up internet connection. Rent checks were processed by hand. Maintenance requests were written on paper. Tenant applications were stored in filing cabinets. There was no integrated system. There was barely a plan. The owner back then was Harold Bay. He hired me away from a consulting job in Syracuse. He told me they were expanding and needed someone who could build something solid. He did not talk in fancy buzzwords. He talked like a businessman who knew he needed real work done. I started small. I built a network that actually worked. I set up servers. I created databases. I built simple tools to track tenants and leases. Then the company grew. With every new property they acquired, the problems multiplied. New tenants, new maintenance issues, new payment processing, new legal compliance. And every time a new problem appeared, I built a solution. Over 18 years, I turned that basic setup into an integrated property management system that handled everything. tenant applications and background checks, automated maintenance requests and scheduling, rent collection and late fee tracking, payment processing, reporting, security, tenant portals, admin dashboards, data backups, redundancies, alerts. It covered 63 properties across 4 states. It was not a single product someone could buy and install. It was a living system shaped by the exact needs of the company. For years, the company respected that. People would say, "Ask Victor, he knows." They would pull me into meetings and listen when I explained risks. They would ask what it would take to scale. They would treat my experience like an asset. Then Harold retired. 5 years before my termination, his son Justin sold the company to a private equity firm. They rebranded it as Veltria Housing. The new owners kept me at first. They were impressed by what I had built. They knew it was valuable. But private equity thinking is different. Their focus is not long-term stability. Their focus is short-term numbers and resale value. The new executives care about quarterly targets more than reliability. The change did not hit all at once. It came in stages, the way a slow leak becomes a flood. First, they rejected my proposal for a documentation team. I explained why we needed it. We were too dependent on tribal knowledge. Too many critical processes were known by only a few people. Proper documentation would protect the company. It would speed up onboarding. It would reduce risk. They said it was too expensive. They told me we could revisit next quarter. Next quarter never came. Then they started bringing in consultants. Young professionals who talked fast and used phrases like disruption, leverage, optimize, migrate, streamline. They talked about cloud solutions like it was magic. They would sit through my explanations of our architecture with blank eyes, then suggest off-the-shelf products that did not fit our custom workflows. They could not see the difference between a simple website and a system that handled thousands of tenants and sensitive payment data. I pushed back. I explained why their ideas would not integrate cleanly. I showed them where our custom code lived and why it mattered. I described the security layers that protected tenant information. I described how our backup system worked and why it was designed to fail safe instead of fast. After a while, they stopped inviting me to planning meetings. Elaine noticed it before I did. One night at dinner, she said they were pushing me out and I needed to prepare. I brushed it off and told her they needed me. Nobody else understood how the system worked. Elaine looked at me and said that might be exactly the problem. 6 months before my termination, they hired Graham as the new CTO. He came from a banking software company. He walked in with confidence and immediately started talking about standardization and replacing legacy systems. He called my work legacy, like it was a dusty old machine that should be scrapped, not a carefully tuned engine that kept the company alive. He hired 3 junior engineers fresh out of college. He assigned them to shadow me. They asked questions and I answered. I tried to teach them. I wanted them to succeed because their success meant the system would be maintained well. But I could tell they did not truly understand the complexity. They were smart, yes, but smart is not enough when you're dealing with a system that was built through years of real-world pressure. It takes time to learn interdependencies. It takes time to learn why certain odd choices were made. Many systems look messy from the outside because they were built to survive real problems, not to win a design award. A week before I was fired, Graham stopped by my office and said we had a quick meeting the next morning. He called it a quarterly check-in. He said it casually, like it was nothing. I should have recognized it as the beginning of the end. 2 weeks after they terminated me, my phone rang while I was in my home office updating my resume. The caller was Graham. I let go to voicemail. He left a message saying they were having issues with the tenant portal. The junior team was working on it, but was struggling to understand parts of the architecture. He asked me to call back. He said it would be quick. I deleted the message and went back to my resume. That same day, 3 more calls came in. Each voicemail sounded more desperate than the last. By evening, Alan texted me. He said the system had been down all day. Maintenance requests were not processing. He said Graham was losing his mind. The next morning, Diane from HR called. She asked how I was doing in that careful voice again. Then she said they wanted to discuss a consulting arrangement to help with system issues. She said the compensation would be generous. That word generous hit me like a joke. 2 weeks earlier, they said I was too expensive. Now, they wanted me back because the cheap replacement was failing. I asked Diane how generous. She offered $300 per hour with a minimum 4-hour engagement. I told her I would think about it and get back to her. Then I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and stared out at the lake. Elaine watched me. She asked what I was thinking. I told her I was thinking they were finally learning what I was worth. Over the next 3 days, the calls increased. Graham, Diane, even Justin Bay, who was still on the board. The tenant portal was down. The maintenance scheduling system was throwing errors. Automatic payment processing failed and affected thousands of residents. Tenants could not see their balances. Payments were misapplied. Records were missing. Complaints were piling up. And every problem I heard about was a problem I knew could become catastrophic if handled wrong. I did not respond. On the 4th day, an email arrived from a company called Devlin Systems, a regional competitor. They managed fewer properties than Veltria, but they were expanding quickly. The email was from their director of technology, Lawrence Devlin. He said he heard about my situation and that his team had admired my work from a distance. He asked if I would be interested in discussing opportunities. They were looking to upgrade their entire property management infrastructure. I replied and set up a meeting for the next day. That evening, Elaine and I were preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. I opened a door and saw Graham standing on my porch. His designer glasses were slightly crooked. His suit, usually perfect, looked wrinkled. His face carried stress he could not hide. He apologized for showing up without warning. He said they had an emergency. The entire system was down and nothing was working. The team could not figure out what was wrong or how to fix it. I leaned against the door frame and told him that sounded serious. He said it was serious and they needed my help. He said the board authorized him to offer a substantial consulting fee. He said $500 per hour, whatever it took. I looked at him and thought about that termination meeting. I thought about his smirk. I thought about his line about 3 junior engineers. I thought about the cardboard box in my garage with my nameplate and old project notes. I thought about every time leadership refused to approve documentation. Every time they chose savings over stability. I told Graham I was sorry to hear about their trouble, but I had an interview the next day. I told him something would turn up, the same words I used with Elaine. His face went still. Then I closed the door. I went back to dinner, and for the first time since I was fired, I felt peace. Not joy. Not revenge. Just clarity. I did not want to be tied to people who treated experience like a price tag to cut. The next day, I met Lawrence Devlin at a coffee shop in downtown Rochester. It was neutral territory away from both company offices. Lawrence was calm and direct. He told me he had followed my work for years. He said the integrated property management system at Veltria was well known in the industry. He said nobody else had anything close. I thanked him. I told him it took time. He said time was exactly what he wanted to talk about. Devlin Systems wanted to build something similar, but they did not want to start from scratch. They needed someone who understood architecture, integration points, and security layers. Someone who could build a system that was reliable, not just flashy. I told him I was interested. Lawrence smiled and offered me the position of chief systems architect. Full benefits, stock options, and a salary 20% higher than what I had at Veltria. The offer was strong. Almost too strong. I asked why me. I told him there were younger engineers who would cost less. Lawrence laughed and said I sounded like my former employer. He told me they tried the cheap route. They hired bright, young engineers from top schools. Those engineers built something sleek and modern, but it crashed whenever more than 100 users logged in at once. Lawrence said they did not need cheap. They needed reliable. That word reliable mattered to me more than the money. I accepted the offer the next day. While I started my new role, Veltria problems kept growing. Alan texted me occasionally. He said the system was partially restored, but critical functions were still failing. He said they brought in an expensive consulting firm that specialized in legacy system recovery. The consultants asked questions nobody on the junior team could answer. They blamed the old code. They blamed complexity. They did not admit that complexity was the price of years of patching and scaling without proper investment. A week after I started at Devlin, Graham called again. His voice sounded strained. He said they lost access to payment records for the past 3 months. Tenants complained about incorrect charges. The consulting team needed input on the database structure. I almost ignored it, but something inside me wanted to hear what he would say, so I answered. I told Graham I was employed elsewhere now and under an exclusive contract. I told him I could not help. He immediately offered to double whatever my new company paid for 2 days of my time. I told him it was not about money. He asked if it was about revenge, as if the only reason someone would refuse was spite. He asked if I enjoyed watching them struggle, that I paused before answering. Then I told him no, I did not enjoy it. I reminded him he made a business decision. He decided my experience was not worth the cost. Now he was learning what that decision meant. Then he said the board wanted to discuss bringing me back. Full salary plus a signing bonus. For a moment, satisfaction flickered in me. Then it faded. I knew what returning would mean. It would mean working under the same culture that cut corners and then blamed engineers for the consequences. It would mean waiting for the next cost-cutting round. It would mean living with constant disrespect. I told him I appreciated the offer, but I made a commitment to Devlin Systems. His voice hardened. He hinted there could be legal implications if they discovered I intentionally made systems difficult to maintain. He brought up non-compete clauses and intellectual property concerns. It was the threat I expected. It was also the proof that he did not understand what he was dealing with. He thought difficulty meant sabotage. He did not understand that a system can be hard to maintain when leadership refuses to fund proper processes. I told him the system was exactly as it was when the company repeatedly denied my request for documentation. I told him every line of code belonged to Veltria under my employment contract. I told him I took nothing but my experience. I told him their lawyers could contact mine. Then I ended the call. My hands shook, not from fear but from anger. The accusation that I somehow sabotaged them was the final insult. I never sabotaged anything. I built protections. I built redundancies. I built security barriers to protect tenant data. Those barriers were not there to punish the company. They were there because data breaches can destroy lives and lawsuits can destroy companies. If someone skipped steps, the system was designed to lock down rather than expose information. At Devlin, I started building fresh. I built properly from the ground up. I made documentation mandatory. I created training programs for the team. I designed redundancies that made sense and were well explained. I was not going to create another system that depended on a single person. I refused to repeat Veltria mistake, even if that mistake kept me employed for years. A month after I joined Devlin, I had an unexpected visitor. Alan walked into my office carrying a laptop bag and looking tired. He asked if I had time for lunch. Over sandwiches at a nearby deli, he told me the chaos at Veltria was worse than I thought. They lost access to historical data going back 3 years. Backup systems were corrupted. The consulting firm said they might need to rebuild from scratch. I was not surprised. Our backup system at Veltria had multiple redundancies and security protocols. The process had to be followed exactly. If someone missed a step, the system would fail in a way that protected the data. That protection was intentional. It was not a trap. It was a guardrail. Then Alan told me something else. He said he discovered emails in system archives while trying to help consultants. Emails between Graham and the board. Graham had been planning my termination for months. He convinced them my custom infrastructure was too expensive to maintain. He promised they could replace me with cheaper engineers and transition to off-the-shelf solutions within 6 months. He projected cost savings of over $1 million each year. One line stood out in the emails. Graham wrote that my systems were unnecessarily complex and that I made myself indispensable by design. I read that line and felt something cold settle in my chest. That was not just misunderstanding. That was suspicion turned into strategy. Graham wanted to frame my careful engineering as manipulation. It gave him a moral excuse for cutting me. Alan closed the laptop and told me the private equity owners planned to sell Veltria. They were preparing for it for over a year. Graham was brought in specifically to cut costs and make the company look more profitable before selling. It was not about improvement. It was about flipping the company. It all made sense. The constant focus on quarterly numbers. The refusal to invest in documentation. The push for standardization without understanding realities. The removal of senior staff. They were polishing a product, not building a future. I asked Alan why he showed me this. He told me he quit the day before, and he was not the only one. Half the IT department left. The consultants estimated at least 6 months to restore full functionality, maybe longer. And Veltria's biggest client, Westbrook Properties, was considering leaving because they lost faith in the system. Westbrook represented nearly 30% of Veltria revenue. Losing them would be devastating, especially with a sale pending. I asked Alan what he would do now. He smiled and said he hoped Devlin might be hiring database administrators. Later that day, I spoke with Lawrence and told him about Alan. Lawrence agreed immediately. Alan joined us not just as an employee, but as proof that Devlin was becoming a place where people who valued quality could belong. That evening, Graham called me again. This time his voice had lost the confident edge. He sounded like a man trying to hold a collapsing wall with his hands. He said the situation was critical. Westbrook threatened to terminate their contract. The board questioned his decisions. He said they needed my help. I told him I could not help. He asked me to name my price. He said anything. I told him again it was not about price. It was about respect. Respect for experience and respect for the work it takes to build something right. There was a long silence. Then Graham said I knew this would happen. He said I knew it would break and when. I told him no. I did not predict failure like a villain. I simply knew what I built and what it required to maintain. Knowledge I tried to share many times until they stopped listening. Then I ended the call. I did not feel victory. I did not feel regret. I felt something quieter. I felt certainty. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences. 2 months into my role at Devlin, Lawrence called me into his office. He told me he got off the phone with Jeffrey Westbrook, the CEO of Westbrook Properties. Westbrook was officially terminating their contract with Veltria. They want to know if Devlin could handle their portfolio. Westbrook managed over 10,000 units across the Northeast. Taking them on would more than double Devlin operations. It was an opportunity and a risk. I told Lawrence we were not ready for that scale. Our new system was only halfway built. Lawrence leaned forward and asked what it would take if we had to be ready. I thought through it quickly. We would need more senior engineers. Dedicated server infrastructure. At least 8 weeks of hard development work. Even then, the timeline would be tight. Lawrence said Jeffrey was desperate. Veltria failures were hurting Westbrook reputation with tenants. Jeffrey was willing to give us 12 weeks and fund infrastructure expansion. This was the turning point. If we succeeded, Devlin would become a serious competitor. If we failed, it could damage both companies. I told Lawrence I would think through the architecture and bring a plan by the next day. That night, I barely slept. My mind worked like it did during emergencies, cycling through diagrams and pathways. I sketched system layouts. I mapped data migration routes. I listed scaling challenges. I planned for staged onboarding so we could move region by region and minimize disruption. By morning, I had a plan that was aggressive but possible. When I presented it, Lawrence studied it carefully. He said it was solid. Then he noticed something. My timeline included a major documentation phase that added 3 weeks. He asked about it. I told him it was non-negotiable. That was where Veltria failed. If we built a system without documentation, we would create the same risk. We would document from day one. We would train the team on every component. We would remove single points of failure. No system should survive only because one person knows hidden steps. Lawrence nodded and said he trusted me. We moved forward. The next weeks were intense. Devlin hired 5 more engineers, including 2 who recently left Veltria. Alan built a database migration tool that translated Veltria data structure into our new system format. I designed a modular architecture that could expand as Westbrook grew. We built server capacity. We tested under heavy load. We planned fallback paths if migration failed. We practiced disaster recovery as if it was a drill we hoped to never use. Halfway through the project, I received an email from Justin Bay, the former owner's son still on Veltria board. He apologized for how things ended. He said the board was misled about what firing me would do. He said Graham was removed as CTO. He said they struggled to recover and Westbrook departure would be a huge hit. He said if I ever want to come back, the door was open. I did not reply. I did not hate Justin. He was caught between his father legacy and private equity control. But I also knew an open door does not fix a broken culture. 10 weeks into our 12-week timeline, we were ready for staged rollout. We decided Westbrook's smallest region would migrate first. 2,000 units in Western New York. If it worked smoothly, we would migrate the larger regions afterward. The day before migration, Lawrence called me into his office again. Jeffrey Westbrook was there in person. Jeffrey shook my hand and asked if I was the system architect. He said Lawrence spoke highly of me. He said he wanted something that would not crash whenever they added new property. He wanted something that could grow with them. I told him that was the plan. Jeffrey mentioned I used to work at Veltria. I nodded, uncertain where he was going. He said Veltria was in trouble. Private equity wanted to sell, but with Westbrook leaving and the system still unstable, buyers were not interested. Then he said there was one potential buyer. I asked who. Lawrence said Devlin Systems. For a moment, I just stared. The idea was almost funny. Veltria fired me to save money. Now, they might be bought at a discount by my new employer, and the technology one was building would replace the broken system they refused to support properly. Jeffrey said if the acquisition happened, they would need someone who understood both companies to lead integration. Someone who could salvage what was valuable and transition everything to the new architecture. I asked if they meant me. Lawrence said yes, but only if the acquisition happened and only if I was comfortable. I thought about it. I did not crave revenge, but I did care about the people left behind, the staff who kept working while leadership made reckless moves. I also cared about the tenants whose lives were affected by system failures. I told them I would be willing, but I had one condition. We do it right. Full documentation. Proper training. No shortcuts. Both of them agreed. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of what used to be Veltria headquarters. The sign now read Devlin Integrated Property Management. The acquisition went through for less than a quarter of what Veltria was valued at before my departure. That fact alone said everything about cost-cutting decisions and their consequences. Lawrence and I walked through the office. We greeted former Veltria employees who stayed during the transition. Some looked away awkwardly. Some smiled in relief. A few people who worked closely with me years ago nodded quietly, as if they understood the full circle without needing to discuss it. Graham was gone, along with much of the executive team that approved my termination. Justin stayed on as a consultant to help retain legacy clients. When we reached the server room, my old territory, I paused. Through the glass, I saw hardware I specified and lights blinking like they always did. It was strange to see it from the outside now, like looking at a house you used to live in. Lawrence asked if I wanted to go in. I told him there was no need. We would migrate everything to new infrastructure anyway. The past system did its job, but the future would be built differently. In the main conference room, remaining staff gathered for an announcement. Lawrence introduced me as the Chief Integration Officer who would oversee the technical transition. He told the room I built the original systems that ran the company for nearly 2 decades. He said now I would guide us through integrating both companies' technologies into something better than either had before. I looked at the faces. Familiar faces. New faces. Tired faces. People who had endured months of chaos. I felt no urge to say I told you so. That kind of satisfaction is shallow. It does not heal anything. So I spoke briefly about the transition plan, timelines, and support. I emphasized that nobody would be discarded due to cost cutting. I said we would invest in training and documentation. I said the goal was stability and respect for the work behind the systems. Everyone understood the irony without me pointing it out. 1 year after the acquisition, Devlin Integrated Property Management became the largest property management company in the Northeast. The migration was complete. All properties ran on the new system I designed. It was documented. It was staffed properly. It functioned smoothly. It could scale without panic. It could be maintained without begging one person to return. On a crisp autumn morning, I drove to the office for a final meeting with Lawrence. Leaves along Lake Ontario had turned red and gold. The lake looked like it always did, calm and steady, indifferent to corporate collapses and rebuilds. As soon as I sat down, Lawrence told me the board approved my proposal. The Technical Education Division would launch next quarter. I would have full autonomy to design the curriculum and hire instructors. This was my condition for staying after integration. I did not ask for a bigger title. I did not ask for more money. I asked for a division dedicated to training the next generation of systems engineers and architects. Not just teaching them how to code, but teaching them how to build things meant to last. Teaching them that documentation is not optional. Teaching them that reliability is not boring. It is respect in action. Respect for users. Respect for data. Respect for the people who will maintain what you build. I thanked Lawrence. I told him it meant a lot. He told me no, thank you. He said what I built was remarkable. Not just technology, but culture. The documentation. The knowledge sharing. The emphasis on quality over quick fixes. Later that afternoon, I cleared out my integration office. Unlike my rushed exit from Veltria, this was planned and calm. I packed my things knowing where I was going next. I was not carrying a cardboard box out in silence. I was moving forward by choice. Justin Bain knocked on the door. He asked if I had a minute. We walked to a small courtyard outside the building. He told me his father Harold asked about me. Harold was retired in Florida, fishing a lot, but he still followed company news. Justin said Harold was glad to hear I was back, in a way. I asked how Harold was doing. Justin said he was good. Then Justin paused and said something that settled into me slowly. He said Harold always believed letting me go would be the biggest mistake the company could make. He said Harold was right. I nodded, not sure what to say. I did not need apologies anymore. I needed proof that lessons were learned. Justin said he learned something too. He said value is not always visible until it disappears. On my drive home along the lakeshore, I thought about that sentence. Value, experience, care, the invisible effort that makes everything feel easy for people who benefit from it. I thought about the years of building and refining and fixing. I thought about the times I asked for support and got denied. I thought about how fast leaders can cut what they do not understand and how expensive it becomes afterward. I did not seek revenge. I did not have to. I moved forward and built something better. And in the end, the results spoke louder than any argument I could have made in that termination meeting. Sometimes the best answer to being undervalued is simple. Take your skills somewhere that respects them. Build with care. Build with clarity. Build with the future in mind. And let the people who chose shortcuts face what shortcuts really cost.